Hello, I'm Lucy Hughes and I'm going to show you how to make a simple yoke alteration from your bodice. So what we've got here is the design. So we've got the front bodice, slight A-line in the silhouette on the front and on the back. Yoke comes across, so the yoke is between the shoulder and the bust point. So the yoke comes across halfway. There's also a buttonhole stand down the centre front. On the back, we've just got a plain yoke across the top and a plain A-line silhouette. So you can vary out your designs any way that you want. You can add gathers, you can add pleats, you can take your yokes up higher or bring your yokes down lower. The choice is yours. So I'm going to show you how to use the dart, and we're going to transfer the dart into the bottom to add the fullness and then cut the yoke across the top. There's different ways to do a yoke, so this is just one technique. So I'll leave the design there so that you can see. So we're going to start with the front. So I've traced off the bodice from the shoulder all the way down to the hip line, because on my design it swings down across the hips. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to close and move the dart. So I'm going to cut down, and it doesn't matter which side I cut down, and close that. So the same way that we transferred the dart around the body, we have to close it to be able to open it back up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut from the hem, because that's where I want the fullness to go, cutting straight through the waist dart up to the point. So what's happened now is that I've closed the dart and transferred it to the hem. Now it looks longer because I've brought it down right down to the hip. So I'm just going to put a little bit more tape in there. Now my design has got no shaping along the waist on the side seam. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to straighten that out. So I'm going to take my ruler from the underarm point down to the hip point and bring that down as a straight line. So that's going to be my side seam line now. And then I'm going to get a piece of paper, and just underneath where the opening is, I'm going to stick that down and in place. Get a bit wider paper. So what that has given us now is an A-line shape. So it'll be fitted around the shoulder and the chest area. Fill in that gap. And I'm going to curve that, straighten it round. And then that's now become my hem. So I'm just going to cut along the hem and the side seam so that you can see. So as I've cut that off, I've just rounded it slightly so it's not as pointy. I'm going to cut around the neck. the armhole. So on my shoulder, as you can see, I've just straightened it off because you don't want to dip into your shoulder. So that so far is the silhouette of the front bodice. So also on the front, we've got a buttonhole stand. So I'm going to stick some paper on. Now a buttonhole stand is generally 3 centimeters. I'm working in half scale, so I'm just going to half that. I'm going to draw my buttonhole stand on. Oh. And then I'm just going to label up that that is the buttonhole stand. And this line here is the centre front. That line there is the centre front. So that says buttonhole stand and that says centre front. And then I'm going to cut the excess away. So now I've got my silhouette. The last thing that I need to do is cut a yoke. So I can see on my design that it is 2/3 of the way down of the armhole. So I'm going to say around here is where it is sitting. So I'm just going to go ahead, keep my ruler straight and in line with the center front, and then draw the line across where I need it to be. So that's going to be my yoke there. And I'm just going to draw on some balance marks so I know where to match it back up. And now I'm going to label up my pattern. So I'm going to put my grain line on there. So I know, and I know that I've got to cut 2. So it's simple yoke design, no seam allowance, cut 2, and obviously my name at the top, so Lucy, and then I know exactly what it is. So this simple yoke design, sorry, that's me. And this is the lower, so lower or skirt. And then because I'm going to cut this away, so Lucy, simple yoke design, cut 2, and this is the yoke. So that's the yoke and that's the lower section. So now what I'm going to do is cut along the line that I've drawn. Which has then created my yoke there. So that's the front done. And so we're going to go along to the back now. So on the front, we obviously use the shoulder dart to open up the bottom. Now on here, I don't want to use my shoulder dart. So I'm going to measure across my shoulder on the front because I want it to be the same measurement. And I'm going to move my dart out to the end of the shoulder. Now it might look slightly different. It's because these have been made up on the computer and they're not exact So this now is my new shoulder line. So that's my shoulder point, working my way back into the armhole. I'll just define that so that you can see. And I've crossed out my dart just to say don't use this. Now on the front, what I'm going to do is on the hem, I'm going to measure how much I added in. 2 inches, because I'm going to add the same in on the back. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to measure down where I want my yoke to go, and it's a similar place to the front but slightly higher. So I'm going to take it up slightly higher. So I'm going to keep everything in line with the centre back. Draw my yoke line across and put on some balance marks. So I know now that that is the yoke piece and then this is the bottom. However, like we did on the back, we need to add in some fullness. So I'm going to straighten off this side seam, as we've got no shaping on the back. And then I'm going to cut straight up, as we added it into the middle, I'm going to cut straight up the middle and add in the fullness here. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along my yoke. In fact, I'll label everything up first before we cut anything away. So we'll just label that up. So these are both cut on the fold. So that's cut on the fold, and then we've got my name and then simple yoke pattern. No seam allowance, and this is cut on the fold, and this area is the yoke area. And then for the lower edge, we've got my name again, simple yoke design, lower or skirt or bottom, and again that's cut on fold, no seam allowance. So I'm going to go ahead and separate them pieces out now. I'm going to just cut these out and reshape my pattern. So the shoulders match up now with the front. That's my yoke piece. And now to add fullness in as a triangle, I'm going to cut the top up to breaking point. So it's still attached, but you can maneuver it. And I'm going to measure 2 inches because that's how much I added in on the front. So I'm going to keep my piece. And for the front and the back, I'm just ignoring the waist darts because we obviously want the fullness there. So 2 inches will swing out to here. So I'm just going to add in another piece underneath to fill in that gap. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in the new hemline across the bottom and cut now everything. So that's the last thing that we needed to do. So I'm going to go ahead and cut around my pattern. It's all labelled up. And although the shape is slightly different, when these are actually sewn together, it will make the volume puff out. So that's your front and back pattern from the simple yoke design.